Today we're talking about meaning making and how that can be helpful for working with hospice patients. I'm Reid Jacobs, the Bereavement Services Coordinator here at Faith and Hope.
And I'm Sarah Gerling, the Volunteer Coordinator and also Social Worker here at Faith and Hope.
Let's start with a quote. He who has a why to live can survive almost any how. And that is a great summary of what meaning making and we'll talk about logotherapy. It's the core of that, is that as long as you have a meaning to your life, you can survive your life. When we're talking about meaning making, it's especially for when there's a difficult time in life, a time of suffering, perceived suffering, a time when you might feel hopeless or out of control. And often a lot of those happen towards the end of life. And so it becomes especially relevant for hospice. By helping people with meaning making, we help bring a sense of purpose and a way to, and the sense of meaning improves the overall quality of life.
Mm-hmm. Especially in hospice, if you're looking at it too, it says like the larger spiritual, psychological, or even existential, and that's something that, in hospice that people we really try to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
That, like as a, like I think I've told you before, Reid, as a social worker, like you go out and you introduce yourself, like, hey, I'm a social worker, I need to come visit with you and your family. They don't understand why they need a social worker or a volunteer or a special coordinator. They're like, oh, hospice is just about helping them feel comfortable and the physical aspect, but it's so much more than that. So this is really why I think this topic is really, really important in hospice, because really what hospice is, in a nutshell, if you're focusing more on this aspect of it, but not many people know about. So it's important to really focus on, especially as the volunteers too.
Yeah, the volunteers can play a big role in this. And so speaking about the role volunteers and all of us can play, is that in this time we can't find the meaning for a person. We can't show them or tell them what their meaning is, but we can help them find it. We can help them realize that there is meaning and that they can create it or find it, and help with that process. And so finding meaning within a tragic circumstance can be hard, and it's can be hard to describe, but take something like a chair. It's a chair, which normally just something you sit on, but you can add new meaning to it by standing on it instead of sitting on it, and the chair becomes a ladder. Or if it's a fancy chair, it becomes a piece of art. If you're in the WWE, you use a chair as a weapon. As a kid, I would always put a couple of chairs together and a big sheet over it to make a tent or fort.
I would just swing on them. That's how I would get hurt. So.
I can't even picture you doing that.
Alright, sure.
Yeah, actually I can. So even something as simple as a chair can have new meaning if we look for it. If you feel like you don't have meaning, it can lead to despair, feelings of hopelessness and helplessness, which can lead to feelings of depression. And if someone loses a sense of meaning, it can lead to suicidal thoughts or desire to be dead. It's common for hospice patients to be ready to die because they're terminally ill. They know that they're dying. They know they're near the end of their life. Often patients who are in their 80s or 90s, they think, okay, why am I not already dead? Or just ready. I know it's coming. I've lived a long life. I'm ready to die. And that's different than someone who's living and hating life, has no meaning, feels they have no meaning, and they just wish death would hurry up and get here. Because then there is no quality of life. And it can lead to, I want to hurry up and make this happen, and I want to kill myself. I can't take this anymore.
Yeah, they're not living, they're just
existing.
They're just taking up time.
Yeah.
Which is hard, not just on the patient, but like on the families, even on the hospice staff, just to watch and knowing that you're doing everything you can to make them comfortable, but it's just watching them having to go through that, and it's hard sometimes to be able to connect and help them find meaning, because we want them to find a meaning and enjoy whatever time it is they have left doesn't mean that they want that for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can want it for them, but they have to want it for themselves also. And so it's also just like a process too, I feel like, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not a one-time thing. Yeah, and it changes over time as the condition changes, as a number of different things. It fluctuates and we adapt and go from there. Having meaning decreases your quality of life. Finding meaning improves it. It can help with getting rid of depression and depressed feelings. And we know that depression can cause physical symptoms to be worse. So even pain is more painful when you're depressed. It takes more pain medication to control the pain when you have depression with it.
Well, it's kind of like, think about if you're going through like a breakup or something, how you can physically like feel it, like in your body, because in your body it really does think it's sick, and that's why we feel like the physical symptoms of like stress and even just being depressed. And so really it makes sense how it exacerbates everything that you're already feeling, especially end of life. If you know diagnosis they have, if they're already in pain, it could just make things so much worse, and it's like a vicious like cycle that they're stuck in. So I understand. Yeah.
To find meaning, it's to reevaluate where things are in your situation, to help make sense of it, and to find meaning within it. And for suffering itself, it's weird because we think of suffering as just this bad thing that we want to avoid, but it can lead to a desire for meaning. It can trigger your I've got to make sense of this. What does it mean if I'm suffering like this? Is there a reason? What do I do from here? And so it can prompt someone to search for meaning, but it can also be the meaning itself, and it can provide a way to find the meaning. And we'll get more into that. Kind of vague. It's hard to describe that just in general, so
but it makes
we'll
sense.
talk in more detail.
It makes you kind of want to figure out why you're feeling the way you are, and there's do you think that's kind of like like an existential type question?
You're getting real philosophical.
Yeah,
it's
very.
It is.
Like, what is? It's like that one quote that I told you. Like, pain's inevitable, but suffering is optional. Like, you don't have to suffer if you don't want to. But if you feel every aspect of your life is like outside of your control, like where do you find that control? How do you get it back?
Right.
Does that make sense?
So this guy is Viktor Frankl. He was a survivor of the Holocaust. He was in Auschwitz.
Oh wow.
His wife died in Auschwitz. His whole family was killed. And he witnessed the suffering that everyone around him in the concentration camp was going through. And he watched how some just collapsed and gave up on life and died quicker than other people, even before they were killed by the Nazis. Just their bodies just gave out. And there were some people who managed to, if not thrive, still do really well and not become, not suffer the way that others did. And the common theme he found was that people who found meaning in their life, despite their horrible circumstance, fared better. And he's the one who kind of prompted meaning making, and he came up with logotherapy. And this quote from him is that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing. The last of human freedoms is the choice to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. The way he saw this manifest in the concentration camps was just amazing and inspiring to me. Like, there were people who were natural helpers, and they would, when someone fell or was too weak to get up, they would go help them, either if they fell off the bed, put them back on the bed. they might share some of what little food they had, share it with someone else, and they would find ways to reach out and comfort other people, even though they were suffering too. And by doing that, finding a way that still being useful, still helping other people, made their suffering less.
It's like that's, I guess you say, their meaning. It was to help others get through it. And sometimes too, they probably put pressure on themselves, like, well, everyone's looking at me to be like the person they can rely on. So if I fall apart, they're gonna fall apart. You know?
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's something. No, that is pretty inspirational though. Those cancer, especially that one was awful.
Yeah.
Ugh.
And this is getting more social worky, but he did looked at a lot of the different social theorists. Some of the big ones said that human nature was to seek out pleasure as much as possible. That was one person said that. Someone else said that the main focus of life is to avoid suffering. But Viktor Frankl said, no, the main focus of life is to find meaning. Why are we here? What are we doing? What does life mean? What do I do with my life? And that was the primary motivator. And so that's what underlies everything he talks about and getting into logotherapy. The focus of it is reframing your experience. And this is exactly what I talk about when I tell people about hospice, that hospice isn't about dying. Hospice is about living until you die. And so for us, yes, everyone is near end of life and is terminally ill, but we focus on the living and helping people live whatever quality of life means to them, helping them do that. And that's what we do. If we can bring joy to what would be one of the rottenest times of life, that's my meaning. And yeah, that's why I do hospice, is to help bring meaning and bring quality of life and bring joy to what could be a rotten time of life.
I completely agree. It's like how you said you first started hospice and we saw people laughing and stuff, and you're just like, this is not a place for that.
Yeah, people are dying, don't laugh.
Show some respect, guys.
Right.
But there's joy in everything, there's always a silver lining, and you just have to look for it and be open to seeing it. Yeah. So I understand what you're saying. Yeah. And you'll see that too, in volunteering and how you say, because you're a social worker, if you want to do hospice, like, you'll see it. Yeah. And everyone kind of, you go through the same like patterns, and you see a lot of the same, I don't know how to say it, like same type of issues that everyone is going through in the families and stuff. Some are harder than others, but it's always rewarding. Sometimes you get lost in day-to-day stuff, but then when someone says something, like a family like thanks you, and you realize you really are like helping, it really does feel good. Yeah. So it's cool. It's like they think we're just there to help them, but they're helping us too.
Yeah, it really is. And we're able to look past the disability or the terminal illness and help them look past it too, so that they can see that their life is still more than their disease. So we've talked about this philosophical stuff. So let's start talking about some of the more concrete ways that we can help and how people find meaning. One of the biggest ones is creativity and creating stuff. For an artist, that might be drawing and continuing to do that. My grandmother was a quilter, and when she was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer, she decided to make her 4 girls all a quilt. So each one would have one last quilt from her. And so she spent her last year doing that. And it brought her joy. She was thinking about them when she made it. She was praying for them while she sewed the pieces together. And so whenever we wrap ourselves in one of her quilts, it's like getting a hug from her and being wrapped in her prayers. And she knew that she was providing that to us. So that gave her meaning. There's other ways that we can help with the creativity. A lot of what we do, especially for volunteers, is life review. which is just sitting and talking with someone about their life, what they've gone through, important stories, things that they've learned. In archaeology, in anthropology, as far back as they can go, humans have always told stories, and story is how we make sense of life. And there's an idea that as long as your story is being told, you're still alive in some way. And so helping facilitate that story, and stories I've heard from my patients and I will tell today or use as an example when I'm working with someone else, that carries on. And sometimes doing some concrete stuff is making a scrapbook or a photo album. We have, I've had several patients when they started hospice, they already had their photo album. So whenever I came to visit, they would like to get it out and tell me about the pictures and the stories that went along with them. So that's something that we can help people do if they haven't already made one, to make one. There is, sometimes people do fingerprints, either in ink or in clay, so that you have that impression even after the person has died. Something that I want to start doing is it's called a plaster cast, and the one I want to do, it's you hold hands with a person, in this case the hospice patient. You make a mold of it, of your hands, and then pour plaster in it, and so you have like this little statue you hold in hands with your person, and then even after they've gone, you still have that connection with them, and it's so beautiful.
It is.
So like just creating some kind of memorabilia while they're still around, so that it actually is like a tangible piece of them, not just the belonging of theirs, but it's like them.
Because when you create something, it's putting a part of you into it.
You know what that makes me think of, this forgot which young mom it was in my life. I think it was like the cousin of a friend of mine or something, whatever. But she said, when I was gonna give birth to my baby, I did this thing. She said I did this thing where you could record the baby's heartbeat. She freaking loved it. She said like that was just a piece of that little being in her that was just so like even more connecting. I guess, do you see what I mean? Like it was a part of them.
Kind of made it more real.
And that's like one of the best things they still have to this day.
Nice.
That's so nice.
Experiences can be a way people find meaning, and that can be going on a trip. I've had some patients who their last wish was to be able to go to the beach, to go see the ocean one last time. And in one hospice I saw, they had someone who was bedbound, but they got a stretcher out onto the beach, and I guess it was the paramedics lifted up the person and got their feet in the water so she could experience that one last time. And for her, once she found out that she would get to do that, it brought joy and started bringing meaning. And I have this thing I can look forward to. I'm not just looking forward to death. I'm looking forward to this, going to the beach and going to see the sunset one more time and going to get my feet wet in the ocean. And so that brought some joy and some meaning to her life. For some people, it's spending time with family, especially if they live out of town. Sometimes when people have been estranged from their family for years, near end of life, it makes it easier to come together and put old hurts aside, and being able to do that can be meaningful and bring meaning to life. Expressions of love. The quilts my grandmother made, yes, they were a creation, but they were also an expression of love. And then teaching other generations how to do it. Like, I don't know if she taught any of her daughters how, but if she had taught any of them how to sew or how to quilt like she did, that would be an example of that.
I was gonna ask, is there like Is there like a Make-A-Wish Foundation for like older people in hospice?
Yeah, it's called the Dream Foundation.
Oh,
and we're partnered with them. I know there's a link on our website. You can click and it has more information. But
do they do stuff like that? Like, I mean, not obviously not like crazy things, but reasonable things like like going to the beach or something like that.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, they do.
I didn't realize. Oh my goodness.
Really? I don't know. I randomly thought of how we did for one of our patients, the one who loved Santa Monica.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he grew up. He was born in the 30s, but he loved, like, his happy place was going to the pier, growing up with his family, and going to the beach. So, and he was depressed, and so what I did was I asked him, what's your favorite place you can go anywhere? And he didn't really know. So I was like, well, what was your favorite place growing up? Like, what was your favorite place you absolutely loved going with your family or just going on your own? And he said, the pier and stuff. So we just printed out pictures of, I tried finding them where he could recognize them from as a kid, and just some of the stuff like the carousel. I think it's been there for years and years. So we took pictures, and he was very iffy on like putting them on his wall and looking at them, but there's something that it really did help make a difference for him.
Yeah, and he's one that I thought about him earlier.
Oh, really?
When we were first started talking about someone who doesn't have meaning in their life. He would get dressed for the day, and he would sit in his wheelchair and stare at a wall because he had nothing to do. He had no meaning in his life. But Sarah was able to work with him and find the Santa Monica thing and the stories that went with this. And did he remember spending time with his mom there? Or?
He remembered, and sometimes I would ask him and I kind of had a rotation for him, kind of like he could flip through them, and then I went next time and they're kind of all over his wall, and what's your favorite one today? And he was, the carousel. Like, I thought about this, and he'd tell me some stories, and sometimes it just, I don't know, you could tell it helped make a difference and made him just happier. Like, and I would tell him, like, even if it's just if you're feeling anxious or depressed, or just think about being at this place, kind of close your eyes and kind of meditate on it and just really feel yourself back in that place, and you don't have to be here within these walls. Like, and it helped make a difference.
It did.
It really did. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want it. He's very, even on his best day, he was always very reserved. So it's just giving him that opening to sit with him and just have him start the conversation and help find meaning in what he wanted to do. You know what I mean? Like, it really helped. So it was pretty cool to watch.
Oh, interesting.
How he was first with us till the very end. Like how he really did improve, like just psychologically, even physically, both, everything.
Right, they go together.
It was actually pretty awesome to watch.
Yeah. It's okay. No, this is one of those great hospice stories. That's when hospice does its best. It brings joy and improved life. That's why we are here. Then looking at another way is looking at attitude, which is how you perceive your circumstances and how you respond to it. Two examples. One is actually someone Viktor Frankl worked with, and it was a widower, and he had profound grief around the loss of his wife, and he didn't know why God was making him suffer through this, the pain of losing his wife. But through conversation, through therapy, he came to realize that, well, what if my wife had lived and I had died? She would be feeling this profound grief. She would be suffering this. But because she died, she doesn't have to feel this grief. So in a way, him feeling it, him having to go through it, saved her from having to go through it. And so his meaning was the suffering itself. Yeah, he suffered, but he was able to suffer so that his wife didn't have to.
Yeah, take on that burden for her.
If one of them had to die before the other, at least she didn't get stuck with the grief, and she had a good death. It wasn't like something long and drawn out or painful. So she didn't suffer in death, and she didn't have to suffer after he died. So that's where he found meaning. So then, whenever he felt the pain of grief, he just thought, Susie doesn't have to feel this.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how attitude and your perception of your situation can change in ways that you wouldn't expect.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. That's why I try to do, not just in social work, in here, just everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I always talk, people tell me that, I'm like, wow, you're so positive. I'm like, it's not, I know, it's not hard to be, I think it takes practice.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, we talk about stuff that even I go on, even in my own personal life, you're just like, oh wow, a lot of people wouldn't be able to really, not just bounce back, but just really like sit with it and be okay with it and accept it. And there's always positives in anything if you really look at it, but.
And then I've tried to take this approach in my attitude towards my experience with cancer. I would never have chosen to get cancer. I wouldn't, if I could change it, I wouldn't want to do it again. But now that I have the experience, I can use that to relate to our patients. I can build instant rapport with some people, and I can identify with what they're going through. If that can be used to improve someone else's quality of life, I'm going to do it. And so that's my meaning that's come out of my cancer experience, that I'm going to harness it to support my patients. And then someone's identity. Identity can be who you see yourself as. For me, it might be a man who enjoys having fun, connects with other people, finds a way to laugh at most stuff, and likes to educate other people. And hospice social worker, that's my identity. If my cancer came back and it was all over the place and terminally became terminal, and I couldn't work and I couldn't be a hospice social worker anymore, that could crush me. That could totally change my identity or steal it away from me. There's a way to still find meaning and to recapture identity. And the example that we'll look at is the role of a father. Father may see his job as to earn income to provide for his family, make sure that there's enough money, enough food, and play football with the kids. And that's his identity as father. If he becomes ill and can't do that anymore, and he can't fulfill his role as father, what does that mean? Well, he can find new ways to do it. If he can't work and bring in money to support the family financially, he can teach his kids how to manage their finances. He can help them, if they're old enough, help them find a job and help them give advice on that. He can even set up a life insurance policy to make sure he had will and all that stuff set up so that he's sparing his family from that financial or legal burden. So he's still doing his role as father and everything that he saw his role as being, just in a different way.
Right.
And so it doesn't have to be completely crushed or stolen.
Like if that happened to you, like your scenario, I can come to you and you can do therapy with me, so you can feel like you're still doing
I can still make fun of you.
You can make fun of me. You have to say my
That's
problems.
because it's life
Yeah,
meaning.
I'm giving you can do therapy. I need advice.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you know, people can do that. Like, little things like that. Sorry.
Yeah, you could still run stuff by me. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, I have this difficult client, this case that's going on.
Yeah,
What do you
like
think?
Still ask you questions.
Yeah.
Because your mind's still there. For certain diagnosis, I guess.
Yeah. For as long as it is.
Heck, that may happen. You may not care. Like, oh, I just want to watch TV. I'm happy.
Bring me a cupcake.
Yeah, that's my cupcake. That's where I want to live and hang out. That's all I want. Go away. Okay.
Then there's the process of benefit finding, which is kind of seeing the silver lining. That sounds cliche, and it is. So I don't know a better way to say it, though. I think in social work, we look for the strengths perspective.
Right. Well, cliches exist for a reason, I think.
Yeah.
I like cheese. I like cliches.
Yeah.
You know, like they make sense. Everyone knows them. So I think
if it communicates the idea.
Yeah. I don't know. I saw when I first saw that when you put silver lining, there's a silver linings playbook. That's a good example.
It is.
Well, it's about a guy, and he's recently diagnosed with bipolar. But the reason why he found out about it. This whole thing happened. It's kind of like a traumatic thing that happened to him. But his whole life just like, he lost everything. His wife, his house, his job. He was in, had to go to psychiatric place. But anyway, the point is that when he got out, he was trying to find the silver lining in everything and just try to rebuild his life and do things that he never thought he would do, and just, I don't know. It's a good movie.
Yeah, and he then was able to approach life in a way that he wouldn't have been before all that happened. So it gave him a new outlook on life, and he was able to find the benefits and see the silver linings and things.
Yeah. And even afterwards, he was still going through like trying to rebuild the pieces, and a lot of stuff he thought he wanted to do, it just wasn't happening the way he wanted it to, but it's happening like in a different way.
I was calling someone this week, doing a bereavement call. It was a lady whose son had died. He was 50, I think he was around 50 years old. But his mom still lost her son. He died, and she's like, it could have been a lot worse. We know he's not suffering now, and we know he's in heaven and in a better place. I miss him. I wish he hadn't have died, but I know he's not hurting now. And so for her, knowing the end of suffering, that was beneficial. That brought meaning to that death. It's not just a loss, it was the end of suffering. So that made her grief a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
And then in other situations, there can be a family crisis, and it can shake things up depending on what it is. And it can feel like maybe a family gets torn apart, but as they heal and come back together, there may have been an unhealthy dynamic, there may have been an abusive or controlling relationship, and now that person's out of that cycle, so that now it's a healthier relationship that maybe you wouldn't have gotten to if there hadn't been this crisis.
That's actually happening with one of my patients who has cancer, and just when I do therapy with her and her kid, she's like 11, like once a month, and she tells me every time I do therapy, not every time, but as we've gotten to know each other, and that even though it sucks that she's going through cancer and she's still going through like chemotherapy and everything, that this actually brought her and her family a lot closer. And they still have their issues, but without this, like, she feels like they wouldn't be where they are today. As much as it's not fun, or as much as it's hard as on everybody, and who knows, she might not make it through. We don't know what could happen, but they're just trying their best to find meaning in it. And even her husband, like, his goal, because they're very religious, and so like his goal now is to, like, through his church, help people find hospice resources and help them, other people who have cancer. That's their way of, like, I guess in their way, like, how next life, God's plan, like, to them, that's like, okay, this is why I'm here, this is what I'm here to do, is to help these people, because through their own personal experiences and everything. So it's interesting what they'll find meaning through.
And this ties right in with the next one of religious, spiritual, or supernatural significance. It's, some may see it as just God's plan. They're fulfilling what God has planned out for them, to what their life is to be, and knowing that is enough. For some people, they see it as a sign from God that here's a need that exists, and here's some first-hand experience of how you can help others through this, which exactly what you were just describing. Being able to go through a tumultuous time can make it, you recognize that I made it through this, I can make it through anything else. And so in the future, when life gets rough, you can look back on that and say, okay, I know I made it through that, I know I can make it through this thing. That's one reason I got this tattoo, because I've been through a lot of storms, metaphorical storms, and I've stayed anchored. I've survived it, and when the next storm comes, which it will, I know I will stay anchored and I can make it through it.
It helps. They call it like a touchstone type thing. Like, if you just touch it, you like feel meaning. It kind of helps you remember why you're here or what you've gone through. But it's true though. Even just random stuff, even in my own life, like, I don't know. I remember the first time I thought this way was not. I think I was like 17. I remember I was like going through a breakup, which obviously when you're 17 feels like the end of the world, but it's really not. But I remember being so upset. I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, 10 years from now, I'm gonna look back at this moment and be, I'm proud of you for handling it the way you did.
Nice.
And that helped me. It really did.
Nice.
And it's almost 10 years later, and I'm like, wow. Obviously, like, is this gonna bug me in 10 years? If it's not, then it's like just, like you'll be able to get through. You just have to. It helps you keep your head a little bit on to make better decisions, and especially with our families who are going through a lot of this stuff, a lot of things sometimes this situation they're going through is what kind of starts tearing them apart. Or if they, like you said, they have like sort of rocky relationships already, it can kind of really separate them, and they cause fights depending on what it's about. But sometimes we have to even tell my patients in this, like the family, like, look, like, this is just a moment in time that we're all gonna go through, and eventually, like, your loved one, eventually we're all gonna pass, and once your loved one does pass away, eventually, you're not gonna have them anymore. It's just gonna be you guys. So really think about what you are saying to each other at this moment, because they're just words and actions, but after this is over, like, you will remember the things that you're saying to one another. So really just think about their relationship that you're gonna have to depend on one another once this is over. So don't just get caught up in the moment. Just think about it, which it's easier said than done.
Yeah, and put some intentionality behind it.
Yeah, it helps you kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
let's do this.
Yeah.
I don't know, but sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
There's other like supernatural ways things show up. I had one lady, her mom was dying. Her mom loved dragonflies, and she said to her daughter, "Whenever from now on, whenever you see a dragonfly, you'll know it's me." The day after her mom died, she was at home and heard this buzzing, and there was a huge dragonfly in her house. She's like, I don't know how a dragonfly got in my house.
Yeah, I know.
She's like, I've never seen one around my house. And she's like, I think that was my mom saying hi. And she told me about a couple other difficult times. She'd been having a horrible day or something, and like there'd be a dragonfly sitting on the antenna of her car, or somewhere else she would see a dragonfly, and she's like, okay, that must be mom looking out for me. So there's a lot of ways that stuff like that can show up, and people see it as a thread going through, and see it as meaningful, and it can help life. And then the last one here, personal growth, which is kind of, we were hitting on it, it's preparing you for future challenges. Made it through this, you can make it through other hard stuff. And I think that wraps up our lesson on meaning making.